Well, combines are already rolling in some parts of the grain belt, a bit early for most of us, but not too early to be getting ready for harvest and the fall tillage that follows. Justin Render is with Kinsey Manufacturing, knows a little something about that with all the equipment they produce, and he joins the conversation this morning. Justin, we're learning more and more about fall soil and residue management, and you've got a few tips about effective practices that can have a direct impact on crop performance come next spring. But anytime we get heavy equipment on our fields, we start thinking about compaction. So this morning, let's start with that.
Compaction is always a concern. I think with the dry areas that we'll have throughout most of the Midwest this year, it won't be as big of a deal. But, anytime we get wet and saturated soils, we always increase that risk of compaction. So we want to make sure we can do that, try to hold off as long as possible. Sometimes it's not feasible, but, by doing that, we're reducing sins for the future. So if we have some combine tracks or other things that we need to fix, fall's a great time to do it to avoid that problem that can really last for many years. It's really important to make sure your combine's properly set up. So we've got the header set right where we're processing that residue, we're breaking it open, we're starting that breakdown process on the stalk, as well as our spreading and chopping system. So our chopper knives are sharp, we're getting that residue spread for the whole width of our combine head, whether it's corn, soybeans, wheat, whatever. That way we can get that residue spread.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, we talked about that process of getting residue to break down at our recent Soil Health Field Day. And one of the keys we're hearing a lot more about is the importance of shredding and spreading that residue to get that decomposition process really rolling.
As genetics have changed, it's become more and more important to get that residue intact or in touch with that soil microbial life to start breaking down that nitrogen balance, that carbon-nitrogen cycle. So we want to get that into contact with the soil or even incorporated to start that breakdown process. So when we come back in the next spring, our carbon-nitrogen balance or our cycle is back to balance. So getting it broke down and starting to weather as soon as possible, whether it be busting the stalk open from our actual knife rolls on our combine or if we're using stalk stompers to push it down on the ground, or even coming back with the tillage pass to start sizing some of that residue. It's all very important to setting that table for next season.
And one other point, a number of our farmers have discovered the advantages of cover crops for their soil. I think the more success stories we hear, the more traction cover cropping is probably going to get. Do you see it catching on in other parts of the grain belt?
Farmers are really starting to see the good that comes out of them. It's something that guys need to work into slowly and understand how they operate, but really it's a great way, especially if you perform a tillage pass, to protect that soil for the next upcoming season. You've got things like grasses or rye or even mixing some legumes in where they can start pulling that nitrogen from the air, getting it in touch with the soil. Things like brassicas, turnips, radishes, things like that can hunt for minerals or even nutrients in the soil and keep them immobile until they start breaking down the following season, putting them perfectly in the root zone for the next upcoming crop, as well as helping with compaction like we talked about earlier, or even water infiltration and even root growth of the next crop. It can follow a lot of those old root channels or root zones. So always a great practice to put into use. Take a look and do some over the fall here before we get rolling, and highly suggest to do that to protect your soil.
Justin Render with Kinsey Manufacturing for your time this morning and for your tillage tips and information. We sure appreciate it. I tell you want to check out something kind of cool, check out Kinsey's Mock Till high-speed tillage equipment. You can find more information about that online and the Kinsey dealer closest to you by simply going to kinsey.com. Well, the market this week reacting to a lot of different factors, not the least of which has been the lousy export sales. Colleen Cavanaugh joining the conversation coming up next.
Podcasts by Federated Media.